Maghull Radio.
That was The Killers with Mr. Brightside, and Simon for his sister Catherine, because he feels guilty because he said that he told her that they were rubbish, and apparently she went off in a huff.
Yes, thank you. I apologise, Catherine, if you're listening now.
This is Mr. Simon Witter, who is tonight's guest, and he's going to tell us all about his latest book. This is the second of his hotel books, Bingo Street hotel books. There will be another one on the way, but we'll tell you about that one later. So Simon's going to read from his book. I don't know if you want to introduce it first before you start reading.
Yeah, well, good evening, Val. It's great to be back here. The Bingo Street Hotel, Poppel's Pinky Pants, was published a couple of months ago. After the huge success of the first book, I really enjoyed writing the first one, and this one was just as fun writing. I wrote it on the bus, would you believe? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from chapter 1. This really brings us up to speed with where the hotel is, reminds anyone who read the first book but may have forgotten what it's all about. So I'll read it now, and it sets the scene for the rest of the book, which only descends into more and more chaos.
Okie doke.
To look at the Bingo Street Hotel, one might think that everything was in its place as usual, that nothing was untoward. The rugs were vacuumed, the music tinkled throughout the hotel, and the windows sparkled, having been cleaned with Carmichael's secret formula. He could tell you, but he'd have to kill you. Mrs. Strong's fish swam from side to side, happily forgetting where they had just been or whether they even had stripes or not. They blobbed here and there, occasionally glancing at Saxby and chattering between themselves. Poor Saxby. The hefty Moggy had suffered terribly in the July heat and, after a brief visit to the vet, had been given strict instructions to lie down at least until October, when it was certain that he would be less flustered and much cooler. In the meantime, Alistair was to make sure he had a cold bowl of water and assorted treats close by in order that he did not become too weak or exhausted. Laughable, really, considering the old boy did nothing anyway. The new bellboy, Mathieu, a student from Brittany, careered about the entrance like an ostrich that has just failed his driving test, lugging bags, pushing trolleys and operating the lift. His arms seemed to stretch even longer with every suitcase he carried. One day, Carmichael worried, they would just drop off, and then he would have to replace him with another bellboy who had arms that had not dropped off. Every so often, Carmichael fired an instruction at Mathieu with ruthless efficiency. He stood to attention like a pencil in a pot, nodding quickly before scurrying off. Alistair seemed sure whether Mathieu was more scared of Carmichael's instructions or the bell that rang on top of the reception desk. It was a combination of both that gave Mathieu a boiled look. Every day his face went a strange orange carrot colour because all the running around was making the guests feel very peculiar, because Mathieu really was starting to look like the soup from the restaurant. "That boy needs a pay rise, or a motorbike," said one concerned guest, dabbing his bread in his soup. "He needs his PE kit," said another, munching his roast carrots. "Yes," replied the first, "the motorbike would never fit in this place." Whilst most of the guests tried not to burden Mathieu too much during the stifling heat wave, Mrs. Tremaine couldn't have cared less. "A pot of tea, please. 1 spoon, no stirring, Mathieu." "Isn't it lovely today?" Mrs. Strong asked Mrs. Tremaine, walking past with a cafetiere. "Isn't it muddy on Tuesday?" Mrs. Tremaine shouted back. "No, today." Mrs. Strong twitched, her cafetiere starting to rattle in her hand. "Muddy today? I haven't the foggiest what you're talking about, Linda. Is that fish off colour again?" Mrs. Strong was still feeling rather sensitive about her fish. She didn't like to discuss their medical history and the fact that it had cost her so much money to fly Marjorie, the one with the stripy disease, to Australia last year. No, Mrs. Strong finally replied, screwing her eyes shut. "Good! Ever since it lost its stripes, you've never been the same," Mrs. Tremaine barked before returning to her reading, unaware that she had upset Mrs. Strong once again. Mrs. Strong escaped, catching a tear in her hanky. Yes, something was bothering her, but it was not the beloved fish. The huge distraction was rattling the windows, making it impossible for anyone to ignore. Anyone, that is, but Mrs. Tremaine. It was a noise that was so loud it made every member of staff and every guest feel like they had a woolly mammoth yawning down their ear. Mr. Strong looked across at Mrs. Tremaine, who was now sipping tea and giving Mathieu a lesson in Argentinian barbecued beef. He could barely hear his pen click. Mr. Strong was starting to feel slightly fed up, having already endured a month in which Astrid Byzantine recorded his new album at the hotel, and the family fostered Tinkle, the nuclear-powered Irish wolfhound that slept less than a newborn baby and ate more than a bratwursting-eating champion of Germany. He could hardly hide his gratitude when Astrid asked if he could take him on his world tour. In fact, he might have been so pleased to see Tinkle leave that he might have even given Astrid a big hug and a kiss. Mr. Strong was about to tackle the terribly distracting din wrapping itself around his eardrums and causing ripples on his glass of water when he was spectacularly disturbed by another outburst. "And she's bringing her prize-winning jams and chutneys! Well, I told her there will be no use for those in a hotel like this, although I know she does have a nougat deficiency." Mrs. Tremaine huffed louder than a locomotive. "It has been such a long time since we have seen Lady Flowerday. I'm quite looking forward to catching up. Is her hand better yet?" Mr. Strong inquired lightly. "I haven't a clue, though I can't imagine punching a polar bear square in the face on a Norwegian cruise is going to do it any good," Mrs. Tremaine said with a small smirk before gently dabbing her mouth and wiping it straight off. "If I remember rightly, she did never take too kindly to other people reading her newspaper," Mr. Strong added, wandering away whilst Mrs. Tremaine whinnied on, recounting the time Lady Flowerday had poured sherry on her cactus because she thought it gave it a nice shine, or when she had moved to Edinburgh to launch her one-woman show. Mrs. Tremaine wasn't impressed with any of her exploits, her expeditions to the North Pole, or her collection of rare bees. She lacked the sort of finesse that Mrs. Tremaine only saw in the Queen, the Prime Minister, and people who shop at posh supermarkets.
Well read, and that was very entertaining. I would like to talk about some of the characters because I noticed that from the first book we've still got Mr. and Mrs. Strong.
Yes.
And her fish.
Yes.
Are they the same fish?
They're the same fish, yes.
We've got Saxby the cat. Carmichael was in the first one.
Carmichael was in the first one, yes. He takes on an extended role in the second book, yes.
Yeah, he's a concierge, shall we say.
He is, yes. Concierge / busybody, I think.
Sticking his nose in other people's business, yeah. And then we've got Alistair.
Yes.
Who's still delivering the mail.
Still, yes. The only bit of excitement he gets around the hotel, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Poppel was actually a guest in the first book, wasn't he?
He was, and he was a guest, and he was a really good character, at least in my head. And I thought this will be a missed opportunity if I didn't bring him into the second book. And then as I did a rough plan, his character just grew and grew. And I've talked about this before, this idea of just letting the characters just ferment, both in my head and on the page, and throughout the edits. As the story gathered momentum when I was writing it, Poppel's character just seemed to fly.
Yeah. He's a extremely self-obsessed person, as will be revealed later in the book.
Yes.
So would you like to move on to the next chapter that you'd like to read?
Yes.
For us? And then we can talk about some of the new characters then, can't we?
Absolutely. So this is from chapter 4. And this is, in fact, a chapter about Poppel Von Schnitzel-Hump.
That's a heck of a mouthful.
It is, isn't it? The plastic flowers vibrated as Mr. Strong nervously made his way upstairs. He imagined that he was the President of the United States of America. He had to. This was nothing like he had trained for before. He reached the second floor feeling like he had just played tennis with a gang of bear cubs. He was still smiling his usual smile and thinking of his happy place, eating Chef Patrice's pastries in the hotel hot tub. The guests are always right, he whispered to himself. The guests are always right. Tap, tap. The door was opened by an assistant who immediately faded away as Poppel Von Schnitzel-Hump nudged himself into the doorway to find out who it was for himself. Oh, what lovely singing that woke me this morning. I have never, ever in my life been roused from my slumber in such a way, Mr. Von Schnitzel-Hump. Mr. Strong grinned as he said the words. He was lying. As he spoke to Poppel, he was actually thinking the complete opposite. He wanted to say that it had been better if he had been woken up by a steamroller squashing his toes and a baby chicken pecking his eyebrows than having to listen to Poppel, who sounded like a very bad demolition team demolishing a very well-built and undemolishable house. Oh, Mr. Strong, thank you! I am rehearsing for the big show and my voice is a precise instrument. I must whizzle and wazzle into the correct position. Out of interest, when is the big show? Mr. Strong's voice faltered. He didn't want to know the answer. A week on Thursday. Mr. Strong's heart sank, knowing that Poppel was going to be belting out this racket in the penthouse for an eternity, made him feel like his wife, come to think of it. He smiled, observing Poppel as he nibbled another strawberry and sipped on water collected from the source of the River Nile. Poppel was wearing a thick red and white striped dressing gown that barely covered his enormous tummy. He did not look at all embarrassed that Mr. Strong could also see his vest and underpants. His abominably hairy legs were tucked into pink socks that rested in fluffy slippers that Mr. Strong had to check were not the two little rabbits that had been lost by the Harper family a week ago. The hotel room was filled with stuff Mr. Strong had never even seen before, and he had hosted some very interesting guests. Count Hoffenhoff had stayed at the hotel the previous summer and requested a completely green room. Apart from painting everything, including the mini milks and the little packets of biscuits, he asked for a green TV, which really ruined the fun if you were trying to watch anything. On the counter in the centre of the room was a gigantic bowl of water with candles and seahorses floating in it. There were bonsai trees dotted on every surface and a mirror the size of Texas so that Poppel could check he was looking at his best at all times. Your hotel has been the ideal setting for rehearsals and my entourage are very happy here. However, there is just one thing, Mr. Strong, that I must ask. Mr. Strong leant in, frowning slightly to make sure Poppel knew he was very serious about whatever nonsense he was about to say. Was he about to ask for another ice cube from the peak of Ben Nevis? Freshly cut grass from the Welsh valleys? Seared snails from Corsica? There must be complete silence in the hotel. Sleep, rest, relaxation, rehearsals, sleep, a bit of eating and more relaxation. That is the recipe for success. Poppel frowned deeply as he said these words, taking himself ever more seriously. Mr. Strong didn't have a clue which he would rather do first. Mess up Poppel's perfect side parting or tell him he was the biggest buffoon the hotel had hosted since Claude Gautier in 1998, who complained about pretty much everything from the smell of his bath soap to the shape of the hotel room door. Mr. Strong took a deep breath, looked up at Poppel and smiled, trying to forget the nuisance he was, trying to forget the fact that every hour he had to check the temperature of Poppel's cough medicine inside the hotel safe, and trying to forget that he hadn't slept since the moment he had returned. Very good, sir. Complete silence. It would have been a done deal, and Poppel would have been a very happy Austrian opera singer if it was not for what happened next. Mr. Strong, with his professionally painted-on smile, nodded and nodded, waiting for the door to close so that he could scream into the nearest champagne bucket with frustration. However, behind him there seemed to be a growing movement, a movement that he could feel a tumbling. Was it ice cubes? No, because it sounded like someone playing a game quite loudly. Surely the Queen had not returned to finish her game of Jenga. The tumbling continued with shouts of, "More! More! More!" Mr. Strong tried to pretend it didn't exist, but Poppel was now aware, like a meerkat looking past him, scowling down the hall at the abomination that was presented. Mr. Strong reluctantly turned around and his eyes met with those of a very hairy man, bare-chested and wearing swimming trunks. He was surrounded by similarly clad men and women who were all dancing to pumping music. "Hey, Mr. Strong!" he shouted. "We found the ice cube machine! Woohoo!" The hairy man in flip-flops was standing in front of the ice machine with a champagne bucket, as excited as a 6-year-old on a trampoline. He and his friends, some with Hawaiian shirts, cameras around their necks and maps of London in their hands, were hooting and clapping every time a new cube appeared. Poppel burst past Mr. Strong with fury, wiggling down the corridor towards the pack of tourists. "Silence, I ask! I cannot share this hotel with hooligans, Mr. Strong!" His arms waving and his gown flapping with every syllable he spat. "This is very bad for Poppel's voice," Poppel said. Mr. Strong frowned, unsure if Poppel was referring to other people that he knew called Poppel. "Who are you calling a hooligan, matey?" the hairy one in flip-flops called. "Yeah, by jingo, I'm as hot as a lizard in Vegas." "I miss the ice of Alaska," said another, still wearing Big Ben-shaped sunglasses. Poppel flounced about like a peacock, making sure everyone was looking at him. Mr. Strong frowned some more. He wasn't saying anything, but was clearly boiling over, raging at the disrespect that normal people were showing to him. Mr. Strong couldn't move his feet. As events unfolded, he felt rooted to the spot and unable to help either his Alaskan tourists or Poppel. Still believing that no one was taking him seriously, though, Poppel started lecturing them on exactly why he was so important. With a beetroot face that Mr. Strong thought might pop at any moment, he said, "And another thing, I have performed at the Sydney Opera House and the Royal Albert Hall on the same night," Poppel rasped. "Some thought it was impossible, but Poppel didn't. I have performed in space, where sound cannot travel. Some thought that was impossible, but Poppel did it. I have performed for the very last snow leopards of Asia, who did not even recognise classical music. Poppel did that too." One tourist was still adding up something to do with Sydney on his fingers when he was interrupted. "Poppel is king!" Poppel stepped back, still ranting angrily, onto his dressing gown and fell bottom first into the ice bucket. He collapsed, slipping and sliding like an ice-skating octopus. Mr. Strong thought he should win a gold medal for his slide back out of the bucket and across the floor on his bottom. He lay for a moment, surrounded by ice cubes and ice buckets. "Oh!" Mr. Strong blurted uncontrollably as Poppel turned into a Viennese ice cream whip, his bottom frozen by the ice and his face white with shock. Poppel's side parting quivered as the ice cubes rushed up his back. The Alaskan guests suddenly didn't find everything so funny either. They thought it best to stay as quiet as Poppel stood up, shaking like a penguin after a cold bath. "Mr. Strong, can I please have a lavender tea delivered to my room?" Poppel asked quietly, feeling some of the embarrassment. His chin started to wobble slightly, as if he was about to cry. "Poppel is going to do some Nepalese yoga. Excuse me." And with that, Poppel flounced back down the corridor, slamming his hotel room door behind him. "I think we got enough ice," one voice eventually whispered.
Do you know what? I would not like to be Mr. Strong for a gold clock. I mean, fancy having to deal with somebody like Poppel. He reminds me of the opera singer in the commercials for Comparison Site. And that's who I'm picturing with the silly little... I know you didn't pick him for that, did you?
No, he
Yours
sort
was
of...
Luciano Pavarotti.
It was more organic, but he's just so outrageous. His outrageous outlook on life as well. He seems to have cocooned himself in this environment where everyone is just a yes man. Yeah,
he's totally self-obsessed.
Yes.
And what I would call a professional star, and one does wonder... Is he actually any good at all? And
that's a very good question, and one I've not actually thought of.
But he seems to... He's making some vast claims, isn't he, about...
Oh, yes. But, you know...
But is he as barking as some of the other people in the hotel, do you think?
Well, he's got some stiff competition. Well, he's got some very stiff competition.
Very stiff competition, yes. And now we're going to have Simon do his third reading, then we'll have a discussion and find out where we can buy the books. And if you've got any questions about the books, please don't feel free to email in. Okay, I'll leave it to you then,
Thanks.
Simon.
This chapter is about a character called Admiral McCoy. At his mother's request, Alistair was sent to deliver a cheese board and crackers to a new guest. The whiffy plate was a carefully displayed arrangement of continental cheese. Chef Patrice had cut one into the shape of a horseshoe and another balanced on some grapes. It was a lottery as to whether Alistair would make it to the top of the stairs without any of the cheesy sculpture tumbling off. He could imagine an avalanche of savouries falling back down the stairs. He winced with the thought. There was also a bottle of fine port on the silver tray too, which looked like it would cost Alistair all his pocket money until the age of 18 to pay back. With feline agility, he placed one foot in front of the other. That wasn't so hard, was it? Unless he fainted from the smell of the cheese, he knew his mum and dad could rely on him to get the job done. He remembered the name of the guest, Admiral McCoy, and knocked quickly on the door, hoping to get this job done so that he could finish his cockroach samurai drawing downstairs. "Boy!" crackled a voice scornfully, swinging the hotel door room open recklessly so that it made a sharp thud. "Hello, sir," Alistair replied, wondering if the door was still on its hinges after it had been banged against the cupboard behind. "A cheese board and a bottle of port, sir." "Yes, so it is. Very nice. Who's it for?" "You, Admiral McCoy." "Doubt it, boy. Haven't eaten a cracker since I was stranded on Easter Island. Damn things, stick in your teeth once you run out of rum." Alistair was expressionless, having never sniffed rum. Never mind being stranded on a Pacific island. "Oh, shall I take it away, sir?" he asked innocently. "No! That's bad luck. Don't you know anything about boats?" And the Admiral snatched a cracker from the tray and bit into it like a sledgehammer. Cracker still disintegrating, the Admiral turned without saying another word and walked back into his hotel room. Alistair had no option except to follow him, considering he was carrying the tray. He stood for a moment in the untidy room whilst the Admiral moved his newspapers. Cans of baked beans were stacked up next to writing desks, on which was a pot of ink, feather quill, and a pile of notepaper. There was also a collection of toy boats in the bath, perhaps so that the Admiral could practice his manoeuvres and refine his tactics for battle. Admiral also had brought with him a telescope that leant lopsided against the gold leaf wallpaper in the sitting area. "So I can check the moon and the stars. Can't trust Big Ben these days, can you?" Alistair thought his watch did a pretty good job of it as he placed the tray down. Looking out of the window quickly, he could see the Admiral had a pretty good view of the clock face. "How is your day, sir?" "Agreeable, I suppose. The westerly wind spoils it a bit." And with that, the Admiral blew a great explosion of air at the telescope's lens. Alistair looked around to check on the wind, but all the windows were shut and the curtains were closed. As he did so, he noticed a neat stack of folded shirts in the mini-fridge. "All these portholes are tiny! More room on a dreadnought. Do you know what a dreadnought is, boy?" Alistair hesitated for a moment. Admiral answered for him. "The finest ship to set sail, besides the Golden Hind." He picked up a slab of cheese and started hacking off chunks with his penknife and jostling it into his mouth with a waffling sound. 60 years sleeping in a hammock never did it me any harm," the Admiral continued, hobbling towards the bay window with his walking stick. As violently as he swung open the hotel room door to greet Alistair, he tore back the curtains and took a monstrously deep breath. "What do you smell, boy?" "Cheese, I think," Alistair replied, making it sound like a question. "The sea! The sea!" He lifted his nose again to make the sound of a helicopter. "I'm here to buy a boat, to sail the seas, to return to Easter Island." Suddenly, the telephone rang by the Admiral's bed. He scowled at it, and Alistair seriously considered whether he even used one before. He presumed that sailors just used Morse code, flags, and lots of pigeons to communicate, but he had never thought about what they do in hotel rooms. He made a mental note to check with the Admiral later. "Hello? Admiral McCoy here, second deck. Is there an iceberg? An enemy flotilla? The Armada?" There was some squeaking coming from the other end of the phone, and the conversation seemed to continue for some time. Alistair waited for a few moments, looking around the room again. He spotted something unusual, at least, for the Admiral's room. It was a new Alexa, plugged in at the side of the bed. As the Admiral let go of the telephone, clearly not understanding how to hang it up, he noticed Alistair admiring the new addition. "Sorcery it is! Haven't a devil how it works, but it seems to read my mind. Present from my daughter, wicked girl." The Admiral scowled at it a little longer before shouting, "Make me a cup of tea!" There was at least a minute of silence, whilst the Admiral waited. Alistair eventually thought that someone should be honest and let him know that it doesn't have arms and legs and is connected to the internet. "The inter what?" The internet, Admiral, Alistair repeated. Does your mother know you use words like that? The Admiral replied, wide-eyed and shocked. Alistair's brain was about to melt down quicker than a dodgy bar of chocolate in a heatwave at the thought of explaining the internet. OK, ask a question or ask for a piece of music. This sounded like something he could understand, and he rubbed his beard, trying to think of a really difficult one. How many wheels does a boat have? He said finally. None. Boats do not have wheels, dummy, Alexa replied. The Admiral almost threw the machine out of the window had it not been for Alistair's quick reactions. How about I give you some lessons, sir, then you can get the most out of it, Alistair reasoned, trying to diffuse the tension between Alexa and the Admiral. Play Love is the Key by Astrid Byzantine. Playing Love is the Key by Astrid Byzantine. Play Snap, said the Admiral seriously. I can't play card games. I don't have any hands, dipstick, Alexa replied. The Admiral was furious, shouting at the little black object. If someone said that on my boat, they'd walk the plank. Downstairs, problems were never far away from Mrs. Strong. She placed the telephone back on the receiver, having tried desperately to find out if the Admiral was on the other end of the line. He seemed to have disappeared after rambling on about the size of his mast and sail. Had his boat sunk? Surely not. He was still inside the hotel, unless there was a lake, an ocean, or a pond she didn't know about. She shook her head, more confused than ever. Mrs. Strong was still bamboozled when a well-spoken woman, smelling like a florist on a summer's day, appeared. Why have I just seen a man using a telephone to climb down the side of the hotel? The lady asked. Oh, was he holding a telescope? Mrs. Strong checked. Yes, the lady replied vaguely. That's Admiral McCoy. He doesn't use the stairs.
Excellent. That featured two of my favourite characters. I loved Alistair in the first book, and of course Admiral McCoy, totally barking. I like characters like that.
Yeah. Admiral McCoy. I'm still to this day, I'm not sure he's a real admiral. That's just my hunch, and even when I was writing, I was thinking,
might be a pretty accurate hunch.
Yeah, he's the sort who would say, if you were having a conversation about boats, you might say something like, "Oh, a boat that has a sail and it floats on the water," and he'd go, "No, don't you know anything about boats? Boats are those things that you keep on trailers in your drive." That sort of admiral,
He would be contradictory whatever you said.
All the gear, no idea.
Yeah. Some fantastic characters in this second book, as there were in the first one. And also something in the book that wasn't in the first. You have all these things for the children to interact with, like a way of drawing a poster, how to finish off Alistair's comic,
yes,
designing a better T-shirt, draw a herd of guinea pigs fighting over a bowl of lettuce.
Yeah,
that I have to see, and I won't give away all of them. Also, the Admiral, that bit didn't mention his parrot. Is it Jose or Josie?
No, Jose the parrot belongs to another character called Claus Dangerfield.
Oh, that's right, of course.
Yes.
He's the one with all the animals in his room. Yes, I've got that mixed up, yeah.
On the topic of the activities, I mean, they're as eclectic as the story itself, but I listened a lot to my readers before I started this one, the children, because that's who it's for. The children and adults who want to have fun, by the way. Don't think this is a serious book, but you are allowed to read it if you are an adult. And I thought, well, why not? Rather than do pictures, because I'm not a great drawer, do activities, things that...
Let them create their own.
Absolutely. Finish off the book, and it follows that thread that I had with the first one, where you have to finish off the front cover. This one, you have to basically finish off inside.
Yeah, well, it's like they kind of own it, really, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And do you know, there was one thing I missed in this book? The Queen. I loved the Queen in the first one. And not that I'm saying the book lacked anything at all. It's just I'm thinking, I wonder if the Queen's going to be in this one.
The Queen was a very popular character, and people already said that to me. She's gone back to Buckingham Palace, but, I get the hunch that after Buckingham Palace was being decorated in the first story, and she went back, and I think she was sort of, when you come home from holiday, and you think, oh, this house... it's just not as good as it has been in Spain. And I think she may return in the Christmas special just because, Buckingham Palace is just not good.
So somewhere along the line, I seem to remember reading that the Queen wants to come back for Christmas.
Absolutely, yes, she does. Yes, she will be back. I can confirm it, yes.
Because, dear listeners, there is Christmas at the Bingo Street Hotel, which is going to be published when?
Yes, it will be November time.
Right.
It will be published, yes, and it will be released as part of the trilogy for the Bingo Street Hotel, just in time for Christmas.
Oh, well, we'll have to get you back on so you can read from that one as well.
And
then you'll be able to say that you just said before that you were thinking of publishing all 3 books together.
Absolutely.
So they can be bought as a Christmas present.
Yes. This collection of stories.
Yes. And so... once again, this is the same as the previous book, and obviously many people listening may not have listened at the time. This is published on Amazon.
Yes,
currently.
so both Bingo Street Hotel books are available on Amazon. Just search on amazon.co.uk for the Bingo Street Hotel. And if you're having trouble on Amazon, you can always go to my website, which is simonwitter.com, H in Witter.
Yeah, don't forget the www.
Indeed.
Yeah, although I never seem to bother with that. I go by a search engine which shall remain nameless. Or does it matter if I say it or not?
I think they're so big, Val.
Google.
I think, yes.
It's probably in the dictionary by now anyway, Google. That I just put the name in now and it all comes up, whether you put www not in it or not.
Absolutely. On the website as well, I've started to do a few videos of readings and a few other bits and blog posts just to support the books.
There was something else that I wanted to mention as well. There's a street plan outside of the hotel, where the hotel is, and down the street, and very cleverly you've named the shops opposite after your children and your nephews.
yes that was I was wondering if they did notice. They hadn't noticed yet, actually. It's a bit
have
of
they
fun.
not?
No, but I did have fun with a few of these, and there are some subtle jokes. I'm just looking at the health and safety incident form that Carmichael MacDonald filled in here. Yes.
Right. So, would you like to say hello to the girls? Do you think that will they be up?
Well, fingers crossed they're in bed by now. Immediately safe here.
Right. So, very briefly, would you like to tell us, Simon, how we get your book again?
Okay. The Bingo Street Hotel, The Royal Visit, and Poppel's Pinky Pants are both available on amazon.co.uk. Just search the Bingo Street Hotel and you'll find them. And failing that, you can go to www.simonwitter.com. That's Witter, Witter.
Right. So they can buy it direct from you, and would they pay you by PayPal?
It contains the links to Amazon.
Right.
And with Amazon, it's printed on demand, and you should get it within a few days.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can do a download or actual paperback.
The first book's available as an ebook. The second book is only available as a paperback because, of course, you've got those great activities which are going to keep you occupied all summer.
Yes. I should have twigged there, shouldn't I? Because there's not much point in having an activity book if it's a download.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, well, I think that wraps everything up, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you listen in the next time to hear Graham read from his book, and thank you very much indeed, Simon.
It's been great to be back.
And I'd like you definitely to come back and read from your Christmas book.
Super. See you then.
So good night, everybody, and God bless.